Good afternoon. Calling to order the school committee meeting of the whole for September 26, 2023. We'll all rise and salute the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll call the roll. Madam Rizzo.
Here.
Mr. Ferrante.
Here.
Mr. Kingston.
Here.
Miss Monteroso.
Here.
Ms. Ty is absent. Ms. Milbury Ellis, absent. And Chairman Keefe, here. We have a quorum. Mr. Dagan, I see you're here to give us an update on the school building.
Yes, do I have to turn this on?
Please.
How's that? There we go. Okay, we have some slides to run through tonight. This is a design update that sort of has gone through the building committee, gone to city council. We wanted to come present the same update to the school committee and do a little Q&A, get your thoughts. Before I hand it over to Don Goriello from Perkins Eastman, the architect, to run through the first number of slides, just wanted to sort of queue up where we're at in general for the project. So we've commenced a pricing exercise for essentially what amount to 5 options on the site. That'll make it on the existing site. It'll be a little more clear when we run through this. That process is going to culminate in having comparative cost estimates for each of the options you're going to see tonight, more in the sort of November, December timeframe. So we're sort of going through design updates while in the background the team is working on hammering out detailed schedules to vet some of the dates you'll see tonight and put price tags on the options you'll see tonight. By sometime around the holidays into January, we'll be transitioning into selection of a new option, proceeding into schematic design in the spring and summer, and hopefully being back with a project approval vote next summer to proceed on one of these options. So I'm going to have Dawn start it off. She's going to go through the sort of the architecture, and then I'll come back up and talk through the site and some of the construction phasing, and we can do some questions.
Thank you. Dawn?
Thank you, Brian. Dawn Goriello with Perkins Eastman. I just want to pick up on something Brian just said. 5 options, 2 of which are required by the Massachusetts School Building Authority. You won't see those tonight, but we will put numbers to a reno only, bring the existing building up to code. That's required by the MSBA, as well as a add reno option to preserve the existing building and add on for a program that's needed. That was done 2 years ago. We previously had done that. It actually got voted off. But we will revive that option, put new numbers to it, current numbers to it, and that will become a option because it's required by the MSBA as part of the feasibility. So those 2 options you won't see tonight. What you will see are 3 all new construction options. If you want to pull back up the slides, thank you, Dr. Kelly. We had more than 3. We narrowed it down. We took some and merged them. You'll see a slide, I think, that's got kind of a chart of previous ones. We put this through the ringer. But as you know, this existing site, quite constrained, not only in the size of the site, but also the roadways on either side of it, Rumney Marsh Academy, the adjacent homes that all abut the property, and of course a large culvert that runs not quite through the middle but creates a pinch point at the back of the existing building. So with all of that, we took a look at the program that is the same as it was for the Wonderland option, exact same size building, exact same size program, and took a look at what it would take to build that size building on this property. Thank you for bringing that chart up, Dr. Kelly. So you can see there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 options, and then there were versions within those options. So we looked at quite a few options. The very first ones we brought forward to the building committee were tall because we recognize that the site is constrained. Upwards of 6 floors of academic spaces and heard quite a bit from the committee that that was not preferred. So we went back to the drawing board, we looked at what might be possible within the area that we can build on and still be able to have laydown space and keep the existing building running. There's a lot of logistics to building on this site while this building remains in use and available to the students of Revere. So with that, we have 3 options that are left on the table. I will go through each one. There's a courtyard option, which kind of makes it, for lack of a better word, a donut shape. It's 4 stories tall at its tallest, and that's for the classroom wings. And then we have 2 triangles. There was an original triangle that we got down to a 5 and 6. I'm trying to remember. It'll show me on the next as we go through them. I think we've got a 5-story and then a 6-story. So we tried to squeeze the footprint of those down and also still be able to provide not 6 full height stories of classes. We know that's not ideal. Trust me, we're architects. We don't want to do 6 stories, but with all the constraints, we did our best to try and find a common ground. So with that, I'll go through the courtyard option first. Like I said, this is 4-story. If you go to the next slide, Dr. Kelly, this is the first floor plan as well as a contextual sketch. What this does is to orient you. On the left-hand side of the slide, that's the first floor of the courtyard scheme. The existing building is on the far left. The corner is shown there. Thank you. Is that you, Dr. Kelly? Thank you. And then RMA is Rumney Marsh to the north. You can see that pinkish red culvert that slices through the site. That's in all of these options. We are not changing where the culvert is. It's quite large in size. I think I can walk through it without ducking my head down. So it's substantial. It serves quite a bit of the city as far as stormwater runoff, and we don't want to have to touch it because it will be a large price tag to do that. So we're trying to avoid it in all these schemes. So this is the courtyard. The main entry is just south of that culvert, the pink line. We've got administration, we've got a heart of the school, we've got some supportive gym spaces adjacent to the gym on the second floor. That was another piece of feedback we heard from the committee, that it was not preferred to have the lockers on a separate level than the gym. Previously, we were stacking it and the gym was up at the second floor with lockers and supportive spaces below. We were hearing that that's not ideal. So in this scheme, we're actually able to put them on the same level, the second floor, and put sort of the kitchen and some other spaces that need to be adjacent to the heart of the school under the gymnasium. So with that, you then have 3 classroom bars that wrap around an exterior courtyard. You can access the courtyard from the north at grade or just above grade, because in all of these, just like on the Wonderland option, they have below building parking. It's not a garage, but it's below building because we need to raise the building up to be above the floodplain. This site happens to be a little bit higher. We need to raise the building less on this site than we did farther east on Wonderland, so we don't have to go up quite as high, but we still need to raise the footprint of the building because of the floodplain, so there's still parking below. And then the contextual sketch shows how we're creating this pedestrian access above the culvert, and then it comes up through the building, through the heart of the school, and to the exterior courtyard. One thing worth noting, public can access the gym and the balcony level of the auditorium via the courtyard for public use, any sort of performances. They can come through the courtyard. There'll be a large stair with a accessible ramp that takes you up and brings you to that gym level or the balcony level of the auditorium, which connects to the heart of the school. We also are looking at a scheme where we're backing the stage up to that outdoor courtyard, Dr. Kelly, no promises, but I know that was one of our goals, to have a 2-sided stage so you could actually use that exterior courtyard as a performance space if you were to open the stage. So we're exploring that because I know that that was a goal that we were trying to preserve. So if you want to go to the next, thank you, the next floor plans, You can see the second floor, the gymnasium's on the far left, adjacent to where the main entry was on the floor below. We've got lockers kind of bookending either side of that, the auditorium, and like I said, the balcony level of that. And then you start to get into the multiple floors of academic spaces. I'm not going to get into all the details. A lot of the tech spaces, maker spaces, all those sort of dynamic spaces are adjacent to the heart of the school. Hopefully can open up either to the heart of the school or the courtyard and allow for students to have the availability to use extra space, to showcase their work, to have any public or any students that are walking through the heart of the school see all the exciting work that's happening in those spaces. And then above you have general classrooms, special ed classrooms distributed throughout. You've got the red are like teacher spaces, so we try to strategically place those so there's observation and eyes on the corridors for student safety. And then the media center's at the third floor with art kind of above that. Yeah, that we actually have the media center poking out over the courtyard right now, which creates kind of a shading area. So there's a lot of work to do in that courtyard, but it can be really a dynamic space. And then the last plan you see is the underbuilding garage, which is still being flushed out. Quite a bit of the parking is under the garage. The only, Brian's going to go through the site plans in a moment, but you'll see the only surface parking, besides a little bit adjacent to the fields, is kind of that small triangle that exists the other side of the culvert. Here's a 3D massing. You can start to see the heart of the school is only a couple stories tall, but at its tallest, it's 4 stories for the 3 academic wings. The last point I'll make, and this is true for all of these, we like to do north-south facing classrooms. Again, best practice. We don't like to do 6 stories if we don't have to. We also don't like to east-west face our classrooms. There's a lot of direct sunlight and glare early in the morning and late afternoon. But in order to fit everything on this site, we needed to run that one academic wing parallel to Route 60 there. So that will have east and west facing classrooms. But we talked to the building committee about facade fenestration that could mitigate some of that glare and really bright sunlight that can affect student learning from a headache and glare standpoint on the work surface. So triangle, 6-story, this is the tallest. This was not preferred, but we kept it on because it does maximize the amount of site that's available. I will say that the major difference between this and the next one you see is that the classroom bar that's parallel to 60 that I mentioned, the far right-hand piece, thank you, Dr. Kelly, that is longer, so less site available in the 5-story. So what we did was we took the uppermost classrooms of this scheme and made it longer to reduce the overall height. But let me walk you through this plan, then I'll show you that one. So the main entry again is from the School Street side. And I will say all of these schemes, you'll have fields that replicate what exists where the existing building is. So in all of those schemes, you come off School Street, instead of being right on top of the building like you are now, there's multiple fields that you will traverse through the site before you get to the building. So this is the most visual point that you'll see as you enter from the School Street side. We've got, in this scheme, we have lockers under the gym. We did hear that that wasn't preferred, but in this particular scheme, we didn't have any room to grow and put the lockers at the upper floor.
Can I jump in here for 1
You
minute?
certainly can.
I know the people that are on the building committee understand the rationale behind that, but just for others who might be listening, the reason we didn't want to have the locker rooms under the gym is because it means additional supervision, whereas the structure with the locker rooms adjacent to the gym would enable coaches and gym teachers and others to be able to monitor both spaces at once.
Yes.
It's really a safety concern.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Kelly. And we hear you, and in some of the schemes we're able to do it, and others not so much. So, that's kind of a little bit of what makes them all very different. So at the main entry, you enter into that heart of the school that I described. You still have all the tech and dynamic spaces that I mentioned in the previous scheme. You also have the main cafeteria and kitchen. You've got music rooms adjacent to the auditorium, and then the bar that's farthest east, the classroom bar, starts the academics on the lower floor in this particular scheme. If you wanna, and then the one sketch up top is really just designating where the massing is, and that, in between, see where it says culinary and tech, that is freshman academy above, and it gets rotated, and we bring natural light into those classrooms. I'll show you on the next floor plans, but I just wanted to point it out on the sketch on the upper right. You can see sort of some trees and whatnot on the kind of rooftop of the heart of the school, which could be nice, could be an outdoor space. If you want to go to the upper plans, thank you. So, second, third, and fourth floor pick up freshman academy on that southernmost bar of academics, and all of the schemes have a freshman academy. I didn't so much point it out in the courtyard, but it does exist on multiple floors. But in this particular case, it starts at the second floor of that southern academic wing. You can see that we kinked that and created a little light well that I just mentioned to bring natural light to those classrooms that are on the north side of that. We do want all of the learning spaces that students are in throughout the day to have exterior windows and natural daylight. So that's a educational priority that we will hold true to. We've got gym at the second floor. We've got media center above it off the heart of the school at the third floor. Once you get to the fourth floor, you start to have art and some of the, the two wings of pure academics, and then those two wings of pure academics feed up to the fifth floor, and then the sixth floor is only that one bar along Route 6, the easternmost academic bar. That bar is all 10, 11, and 12 grades, so there's more academic spaces than the freshman academy. And it also has underground parking. Here's the massing for that. So you can see at the sort of far right of the screen is the 6-story. It's connected by a multi-story connector. Yep, perfect, thank you. And then the freshman academy is below that. The heart of the school is literally through the middle of the school. And then you have the health and wellness, which is basically the gymnasium and all the support spaces for it. And then performing arts, the auditoriums adjacent to the heart of the school. And then if you go to the 5-story triangle, I mentioned earlier what that meant as far as differential in the building plan. A lot of the main spaces are similar to what I just described. And like I said, that easternmost academic wing gets, I want to say it's somewhere between 4 and 6 classrooms longer, like double-sided corridor. So it's about, I'd say 75, 80 feet longer, taken away from the site. But what that does allow, if you want to go to the next page, thank you, is that all of the academics end at the 5th floor. So there's no 6th floor here. And then lastly, you can see the massing for that. It's hard to see when you don't have them next to each other, but the gist of it is that that easternmost academic bar is 1 story lower, which is about 14 feet floor to floor. So that, in a nutshell, is a quick description of over 400,000 square feet. So without getting into the detail, that starts to lay out how the buildings are organized and what's left on the table as far as options in the feasibility study. So I'll hand it back to Brian. He'll go through the sites and some of the schedule. Happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
So do you want to do questions first?
It's up to
and then we can
you.
go to
You tell
site?
me. I'm happy to do that if you prefer. Sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Fronte.
Thank you. My first question is, with the culvert being where it is, what is the distance from the building to the culvert?
Yeah, I think we need to stay 30 feet away from the center line is what, if center line or from the edge? I think it's the center line. 30 feet from the center
Are
line.
we gonna be okay with that?
Yeah.
So
All
you-
of our, you'll see on the site plans, there's a dash line, I believe, that's still there that it delineates where that 30 feet.
Okay.
It's really hard to see at this scale, but there is a line there that tells us kind of the buildable area back from that setback.
My second question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there only one egress in and out here?
From the site or from the?
From people coming into the site and leaving the site? like for buses and cars and whatever?
No, there's access. Do you want us to go through the site plans? I'm happy to do
Or
that.
is that part of the site?
The next thing he's gonna do the
Okay,
the
we'll let
site,
that go.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine.
it may help answer your
All right,
question.
that's
I'm happy to answer it, but so there's always access off of School Street, and
Yeah.
then we're trying to use either the opening from Rumney Marsh and carry the buses down and around to get bus drops separate than car, because that's the safest way to do it in a ideal world. In a perfect site, you would have cars separate from buses. We're still trying to hold true to that because it is the safest way to have students dropped at a school. So we're trying to preserve either the opening at Rumney Marsh and or create a new one, but that's a state road and there are a lot of
Right.
hoops to jump through. Not saying it can't happen. We have our traffic engineer doing a study out here and trying to understand what that means. So we're trying to get access, and we're being told by others on the site subcommittee that having access from the east as well as the west is preferred. So
Okay.
you'll see it in the site plan, and all of it's still in flux, and we're still trying to sort through what's possible and what's not, and what will be easy to do and what's not.
And my last question is, the underground parking. I know you don't have how many spots are gonna be available. Are we gonna have enough spots for underground and above-ground parking for whatever diagram gets picked here? Because parking's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
not talking during construction, I'm talking when we're all said and done.
No, it's definitely tight. I think we meet I don't have the number off the top of my head. I can look it up while Brian's going through the
Just
site.
approximately, I don't need.
Yeah, I want to say it's 300 and change.
We're meeting the zoning, and it's about similar, in the end, it's about similar to what's here now. There's not much of an opportunity to increase it, but to create the same amount of parking, is why we need to go under the building. If we didn't have under the building parking, we'd be reducing the current parking.
Substantially.
So-
And it is worth noting, at the last building committee meeting, we previously were showing district offices, this, as a standalone building on the other side of the culvert, as well as possibility for parking the buses, which happens now behind this building. But it reduced, I want to say 90 spaces, I'm going off the top of my head, memory, but for those to exist there, that would further reduce the parking, and those were voted off, meaning there will be space in the city found for this office, district office, as well as for the buses. So the hope is to preserve as much surface parking on the other side of the culvert, and then balance it out with the zoning requirement for underbuilding.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, Mr. Kingston?
During construction, is there any thought to maybe creating an exit way or entrance way to try to keep some of the heavy trucks and try to mitigate some of the traffic during construction?
Yep, I'll let Brian answer the
Thank
logistics
you.
question.
I was gonna say, do you guys want Brian to go through the site plan? It sounds like that's what the questions are about. Is that good?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and feel free to
Yeah.
interrupt me as we get it up on the screen too. Because the site is a challenging site. What's on the screen now is just existing conditions. And so what you can see here is you got some colored arrows showing vehicular traffic in blue, bus traffic in yellow. As you all know, most of the traffic here comes in off School Street and exits at a few various points. We're more or less keeping all of the existing ins and outs here on the table as traffic is further studied. You can see the blue lines running east-west, left to right in this. That's the culvert with the engineers, going back to Mr. Ferranti's question, their suggestion is to stay 30 feet off the center line of that. Could end up requiring some temporary bracing depending on where a crane ends up, et cetera. So there might be some engineering to keep that, to really keep off that thing. But right now, our guiding design principle is 30 feet in both directions, should not undermine or compromise that structure. You can sort of begin to see here how the RMA and this site more or less work as two separate islands in terms of vehicular flow. That's something that is important to not create a cut-through, which I think we all know would happen if we just let cars go either clear east or west. But however, we are looking at what can be done off of the highway. Ideally, that's where all the construction traffic comes from. That's definitely going to be something we have to work with the state. As Don said, that's a state road. But the other thing I think to note, there's a good deal of site prep here to really get to the point where we're building a building. You can see all sorts of white lines crisscrossing the soccer and the baseball field. Most of those are electrical mains that actually power this building and RMA. And you can also see a hatched red area where there's some leftover soil from the RMA project. All of that's got to come up and go before we're really building this building. We'll have to put in temp mains, most likely off of Belgrade to power the high school, and a new permanent main for the RMA somewhere off of the highway to basically be able to dig out that foundation and really start building that site. So whole lot going on in this site. This just sort of sets the basis of what it is right now. So Dr. Kelly, if you could roll forward, we'll look at a few different versions. Now these coincide with the three versions that Dawn just ran through. This is the courtyard scheme. You can see that interior courtyard space labeled 5 on this plan. And as Dawn alluded to, we've looked at various floor configurations here. We understand this challenge is the higher you go, especially in a school. The reason was really footprint that the building's going to take up versus how to use a tight site. So what this scheme pretty successfully does is it gives the school sort of an enclosed, secure area to call their own. As you see the taller schemes that we'll go through in a minute, more or less they result in a little bit more space on the south side of the site towards East Mountain, and a little bit more space where the front entry is in the dead center of the site. But then again, that's program space. So as that courtyard and these other schemes is eliminated, we're looking for that to be used space, academic space, outdoor classroom areas, et cetera, functions. That does get displaced on the outer part of the building. So as you're thinking about these various options in 4 versus 5 versus 6, that's sort of where the balance is found. So what you can see here is we've replicated a lot of the same colored lines. Vehicular traffic coming in off of School Street, it could exit out through Cary, could exit out through True, and a bus loop one way or the other somehow interacting with the entry area at Rumney Marsh, and then bringing buses all the way around parallel to the neighborhood and out Cary there, potentially back out to the highway. But that alludes to what Dawn was saying of sort of trying to keep the bus flow separate from the main vehicular flow, allow them to queue up separately, and also get the literally the door of the bus on the right side of the road there, so kids aren't getting dropped off in the middle of a road during pickup and drop off. So you'll see little black triangles around the building. A lot of those point to main entries, and we have some garage entries too. I would say the garage entry ramps aren't fully flushed out yet. That's something that is really going to take a little bit more work with grades to figure out. But you can also see, as Dawn said, the replication of the 2 fields that would need to be taken away over on the left after the existing school is knocked down, and the addition of some distributed parking over there and 5 tennis courts to support the tennis program. So this starts to give you the view of we're trying to maximize how much surface parking we can keep, but to meet zoning and to have anything similar to what's here, we have to use that space under the building. Otherwise, it would simply be inadequate for parking. But as we talked about a lot when we were down at Wonderland, part of being in the floodplain, and we're a few feet higher, as Dawn said here, you have to raise these buildings up. First floor of this building's gonna not be on the grade that the fields are on. It's gonna be higher than that. So that brings up a natural opportunity to capture that space under the building and use it for parking.
Will you just point out how many spots? I can see it now that it's on. So plus or minus 350 under building, 250 surface north of the culvert, and then it looks like 51 or so in the distributed over near the field. So we're somewhere in the 650 range.
And just the note says that this 250 does not count if you have lose the 70 spaces for a district building and 30 for the buses, so that would be minus 100 spaces.
Correct. You can see where those, dedicated area for bus parking and a freestanding district admin building would really challenge parking on this site. There's really nowhere else to put them. We would have to replace the park. This assumes a one-to-one replication of the park, and it more or less just fits. You can take away the park space, put it back on the other side, and meet a one-to-one ratio. If you could go to the next scheme, we'll go through the 2 triangle schemes here, and again, they're very similar. This is the 6-story scheme. You can see that some of that outdoor program space that was in the courtyard sort of spills into the areas south of the building and gives a little bit more room towards the building that we're in now in the middle of the site. And you can see that that 6-story bar out on the Legion Highway doesn't extend all the way down to the corner. When we jump to the next version, the 5-story building, I think Don did a good job of explaining that. You'll see that bar of the building take up more of that corner. But generally speaking, same approach to traffic and all these schemes. Traffic is always going to be an issue anywhere on any project, any city, any town, especially a project of this size. But really, these 3 schemes we're looking at here are pretty neutral when you compare them to each other. There's really no fundamental advantage to traffic and site access between these 3 schemes. It really comes down to shape of the building, how the building's configured, and where you want the outdoor space to be. One more slide. This shows the 5-story version. You can see that bar along American Legion Highway got a little longer, took up a bit of that corner to make a 5-story academic wing out there as opposed to 6, but otherwise the site and the approach to traffic is identical. Next slide, please. So lastly, where I wanted to leave this, and this is really something that's being vetted as part of our the cost exercise I noted at the beginning of this meeting of verifying we have a construction manager, Consigli, on board, and they're doing a bunch of logistics analysis. This is the most simple way to present how we would build on this site. And we think these dates are solid, but by the time we're coming back and presenting a little more in November and December, we'll make it a promise that these are real. Right now, we're really just working with when do we think we can get permits in place? When do we think we can get biddable documents in place? When do we think we can get that site prep work done, moving those electrical mains, getting rid of the contaminated soil, and then start building what is a pretty large building. So right now our planning is that we would effectively be putting a fence up where the red dashed line is. That is phase 1 main building construction. We would be taking away a little bit of the parking just along the 3rd baseline and more or less going up to the culvert and out to the property line in the east and south directions. We would be looking to start pecking away at that site prep ideally in the summer of 2025. And this would stay fence around it, nobody from the public in there through building opening in 2028 for the beginning of the academic year in 2028. Now the blue area is what I'm calling phase 1A. That's area that we know needs to function while the existing school is operational. We can't just take that over. So we think the 2 summers leading into the 2028 summer, we would have to take over that whole area and rebuild, shut down basically the whole site. So the existing school could be accessed to and from School Street, but that's it. No other parking on site. Do utility work out there, rebuild those rebuild the parking area, and more or less get the access road squared away in the area right in the dead center, the main entry loop. Get that all cleared out so that we could start for real with classes in here in, is it August? It's usually when classes kick in, August 2028. August 2028 would come, so pretty much everything in blue and red would be done. We would then put a fence around this building, proceed with abatement, demolition, and then finish site work, replication of the fields. That would be from that summer of 2028 till the end of the calendar year in 2029. Not the best time of year to turn over fields, but I think we will need all of 2029 to get those fields built. That'll probably mean even that grass baseball field needs to seed up through the spring. Usually you don't want competitions on that for 2 growing seasons, so there's a good chance that the baseball field really won't be able to be active until summer of 2030. The other field's a turf field. You can get right on that right away. So again, we're going to be challenging and vetting this phasing. It might evolve a bit in the coming months when we come back, and we'll have the contractor present exactly how they plan to get this together, where they're going to plan laydown spaces, crane spaces, etc. But this is the most general story that's applicable to any of these options that you've seen tonight. I think that's a good spot. We'll pause and see if there's other questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ferrante?
Oh, thank you. Brian, I have really two questions. Number one is that, once we start construction, is Ambrose Park going to be where the people will be able to park their cars during construction?
So right now, the goal is to not touch or utilize Ambrose Park at all, and to take away as minimal amount of parking as we need to build that building. So right now, we're not looking at any temporary parking.
Where are they going to park?
They'll stay out on where they park now. We will be building on the baseball diamond, not on this parking lot.
Okay. My other question is, why are we doing the baseball diamond in grass and the soccer and field turf?
Meaning,
The baseball field, you said, is going to be grass.
that's my understanding, correct?
Okay, and why is the soccer being done in turf? Would it be easier to do both in turf? Would it be a lot quicker to do?
I think that's certainly something that we could talk to the AD and stuff about. And I honestly, I think we're planning on grass for the baseball field.
I haven't ever done a turf
Yeah.
baseball field, not for high school, yeah.
Yep. We can certainly talk to
Possible.
the AD and some other folks and sort of explore that. It's a good time to be doing it while we're putting
Well, that'll
numbers
cut it-
on things.
That'll cut a year off your process there.
Only
True.
for that field.
Yeah.
Yeah, for just the baseball field I'm talking
It
about.
would certainly mean it can be used right when it's turned over, as opposed to if the grass goes down in the fall of 2029, you really don't want heavy use on that till the
Right.
spring of 2030. So I see where you're going with that. And
Okay.
we can certainly, we can even maybe put a comparative cost on that.
And my last question on, it looks like from the diagrams that you're going to have two egresses, one from True Street and one from School Street, and exit off of Carey and True Street. Am I looking at it the right way?
Yeah.
So it's pretty much what we have now.
It's trying to maintain what you have now and getting some version of buses around the other side of the building to try to separate the traffic out, but very similar from a pedestrian, well, a vehicular access, non-bus access, very similar to what's here now. Just a lot more queuing. The benefit of being further back into the site is there's going to be a whole long stretch of sidewalk that does help with queuing and drop-off, even though I know everyone wants to be dropped off right at the front door.
And my last question, I promise,
Is that the question before?
well, whatever, thank you. That access onto 1A, what are the chances of that happening? I know you have to go through a long process, I'm sure, to apply for that, to do it, which would obviously would make this project a lot easier for you guys, and, getting equipment in and out, and, once the school opens, parking, getting in and out, because now you have a third egress, which
Yep.
would make it easier on the neighborhood. Do you have to apply for special permits for that, or how does that
Yeah,
work?
that would be its own permit path. I mean, this building's gonna need every permit there is out there for the most part. So, it's definitely something we're gonna look at. Those permits do have a long lead time and they're not always successful. So I think it's gonna be a question that takes well into development of a building on this site to really answer. But we're looking at researching it sooner rather than later because we really at least minimally want to get permits to bring a whole lot of construction vehicles on and off that. The other piece of that is we all know that stretch of road really backs up certain times of the day. So thinking of how really could or would it help pick up drop-off is something the design team and the traffic engineers are looking at, simply because a lot of those times it's stacked out there anyway.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, the engineer is due this week, I believe. He's coming to do traffic studies, so that'll be informative for all of this.
Thank you. Ms. Monterosso?
I appreciate once more the professional opinion that the 6-story building is not the best option. I think our body is in agreement, but outside of us, it's not. So I just wanted to again share how I strongly believe the 4-story option is the best. I love the enclosed courtyard that just provides more safety for students and green space. I also have a few questions, but my first general question is if you could walk us through the ADI compliance, like elevators, and like what that looks like for each model so that we're aware.
Dawn is a pro at this, by the way.
I do have credentials. I'm the chair of the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, so obviously accessibility is always on the forefront of my mind. But I want to say we have 3 or 4 pairs of elevators in each of the schemes. They're really small because you're looking at a tiny little plan, but the idea is that there are multiple bays of, meaning pairs of elevators, as well as a service elevator, and elevators take food up when the cafeteria is on the second floor. I could point them out if it's helpful. I can walk over and point to them. Yeah.
The big plans are on the website, in case.
Oh, sure. And then the big drawing plans are also on the website. So it's not just about elevators, though. I want to point out that we're thinking about access into the building, safety getting out, how, in a 6-story option, understanding what that means in the event of, emergency. What does that mean for the students that are at the highest level? So we are thinking about that, planning for it. That doesn't mean, there's high rises all over Revere, and I'm not saying that that's solves things, but there are people that are elevated that need to get to safety, and we will certainly have a plan in place to make sure that if it does go, even 4 stories, frankly, getting students down in a safe manner will be a priority. And then throughout the building, there'll be all access to everything. It'll all be code compliant. So that's in our case above and beyond. We often do things like sound in all the classrooms, sound amplification systems, so that you don't have just the classrooms that students need to go to who need that, but universally trying to accommodate students in all the learning spaces. So does that answer your question?
Yes,
It's not,
thank you.
we're not deep into the detail yet,
Yeah,
but we're
that's
planning for it. If
Yeah,
that
I think
helps.
it's 6 stories is always so hard. I think if there's like an emergency, how is an administrator supposed to run up 6 flights of stairs to go break up a fight per se? So it's always good that everyone, including people who are watching and other bodies of the city, are very aware of that. I think my other question, so a general one, I'll just put them all together. You can choose how to answer them.
Sure.
It's kind of like what the next steps are, but also I see that we wouldn't be breaking ground technically until summer 2025. And so I was just wondering if you could walk people like me who may not necessarily know, like, what are all the steps that are making us wait until summer 2025 to break ground?
I'll hand that to you, Brian. I'm sure you'll give a more detailed response.
So there's sort of 2 sides to this. One is just the general design process that any public building, maybe it wasn't even a school, would go through. Right now, we're in a feasibility study. Feasibility study culminates in a phase called schematic design. You can see we have multiple options right now. And really, to get the full resolution of cost certainty, schedule certainty, phasing certainty, how to build it certainty, you more or less have to bring something through schematic design. So we're at the point now that we're looking towards the end, between now and the end of this year, to pick one of the options. We would then spend January, February, March, April in a schematic design phase to really achieve that cost certainty, schedule certainty. After that comes more design phases. There's a phase after that called design development, more and more drawings, more detail, and then eventually you get into a construction document phase, that's when the drawing set goes from 3/4 of an inch thick to 3 inches thick. Every piece of the building gets drawn. Parallel to that is MSBA. MSBA requires, the school building authority requires that you proceed in that manner. So right now it's pick an option, submit the option at the end of this year to the MSBA. They give a head nod. We move into a schematic design phase to get more and more detailed on the one option instead of trying to be detailed on 5 options. We then lock down an estimate for that building based on the schematic design drawings next spring. We have permitting paths vetted by then, not necessarily started, but we've talked to agencies. We know how long it's going to take. We come back in the late spring when the schematic design phase is over. Building committee, school committee, city council all review those numbers. That's the end of the feasibility study. That's when a project needs to get voted on and funded by the city. So come next July is sort of the target we have for schematic designs done. We have all those detailed plans. We pass a project, we move forward. So what that means is come next July, August, there's a real project, there's a real budget. It'd take between a year and a half to have all the permits secured to be able to build. And that year and a half is the same time frame it takes Don's company to go through that design development phase. 60% construction drawings, 90% construction drawings. And eventually those drawings result in bid packages that we publicly bid. So right now it's race to the end of a feasibility study, get a project passed and funded in the summer, and then somewhere between a year and a half for all the permitting, construction document phases to get a shovel in the ground, then 3 years to build it, then a year and a half to knock this building down and build the field. So I know it just sort of keeps stretching it out, but right now we're finishing feasibility. We really need to move on to a funded full project after that to have Don's company move into that real permitting path that takes a year and a half to secure and be able to start digging up earth and building things.
I appreciate the
That
breakdown.
might have been too much detail,
No,
I'm sorry.
thank you
Yeah.
very much.
If I can mention one more thing, and my apologies, Brian, if you already said this, but I want to make sure it was clear, that MSBA also requires votes of first the school building committee, then the school committee, and then the city council in order for us to submit the preferred schematic design. And that's where we reached the hiccup the last time we went through this process on the Wonderland site. We got that far and then had to start over.
Yep, we finished schematic design once at Wonderland. So we picked options, we then did a schematic design, and we were at the funded point. So we've got to get back to that funded point, and that's July is the point that it's going to take till July to get back to that, have a project to fund.
So right now, the building committee has to vote, and then we vote, and then city council.
Correct.
Okay, and then is there a meeting scheduled for the building committee? Was that supposed to be? Oh, okay.
And
I believe the next building committee meeting is October 7th. Does that sound right? 12th? 12th, okay.
Yeah, so the October 12th is, building committee's not going to have the detailed cost analysis
Right.
until November. So nobody's
Nobody's voting on anything for a little while.
Yeah, correct. So it's really, the pick the option is going to be towards the end of this year. Move the option through the school committee, city council, spend another 4 months on schematic design, move that through all three committees, approve a project, approve borrowing.
Thank you. We have a few questions over here. I'll start on the end. Madam Rizzo?
Thank you. Brian, I don't want to jump ahead, but you brought up the word turf. That hasn't been a definite yet on the fields, right?
Right now, it's our base assumption, but it's not a definite. Certainly something that could be discussed more with the school.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking with all the I can never say the word. Yep, that word. And knowing that it's not environmental friendly, I hope we can have more of a discussion on it later on.
Yeah, we definitely could, and something that Don's consultants could help with. We have experience with that. I'm not certainly not marketing it. It really is use. With a grass field, you're going to need to give it off days all summer. You're going to have to not allow people on it, and
Yeah.
oftentimes it doesn't work out. But I completely understand where you're coming from, and we can
I
discuss
prefer
that
no
more.
brain cancer in our students.
Understood.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston?
I prefer the turf field for a lot of reasons, but I'll be willing to look at the medical studies. The other question I had was, and I know, I'm happy that I thought the culvert was in the middle of the project, so I was happy to hear that. Would there be any way to use the existing opening on the highway to access the site from the Rumney? If the state says, no, you can't do that, I can't imagine
There could
heavy
be.
equipment either coming down True Street or trying to go up Cary. You're lucky you can get a car up Cary now.
Yeah.
With parking on both sides. You get a heavy piece of equipment that's gonna build a building this size up Cary Ave, I'd like to see it. And I
Yep.
know True Street's a lot wider and that'll probably work, but it's still a problem. So I don't know if there's some way to access that road, access from the Rumney site where there is a curb cut on both sides, in and out, access the site that way, because I just feel bad for that neighborhood. Depending on the height of the building, most of those people that live on East Mountain Ave are looking at a 60-foot building in their backyard. I think that's a fair, even a 4-story building, with the roof and all that, they're gonna look up and see 60 feet in their backyard. So, and to put them through, 3 years of, heavy equipment going up Cary, I think it would be a tough sell. So,
Understood. And
Thank you.
that is the goal, Mr. Kingston. It is to even if we can't get new curb cuts, either to do something, I would say unique is the word I'd use, to not disturb a curb cut and get construction vehicles over it, or somehow share some of the openings at RMA. We're having Consigli, the contractor, look at all those, because it's just, it's not going to be an option to bring heavy vehicles and trucks in through the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it. I know you folks know what you're doing. I don't mean it that way. It's just so that, you know, they can maybe get a little relief, because it's going to be tough for them, and I sympathize. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Aisha Ellis?
Exactly.
My apologies if you already discussed this and for my tardiness, but one of the concerns that I have is the growing number of the population of students and, you know, the projections that may have been made. So I'm just wondering whether we can have a breakdown of like what the various stories would allow for. I know that there's, you know, visually, nobody really wants that, but I also want to kind of think about the future and not having to build a new school in, you know, so many years to come. I know, you know, Paul Revere School, had we thought to put an additional story or two, may have relieved some of the issues we're having now. So I would be interested in hearing those projections regarding, you know, how many students we would be able to fill with the various 4th, 5th, and 6th story options.
Sure, so all of them right now, all of the options for this project are tied to the number 2,450, which is what is authorized by the school building authority. That has its own process prior to being invited in. That's a number that in my experience cannot change and will not change. The school building authority does a lot of work to come up with those numbers, and they are not interested in that number going up or down. However, all of these buildings have to be designed to have some means of expansion in the future. And that's something that I think our teams will talk a little bit more about, whether that's up or out, and have the building designed and ready, that if expansion's needed, we know which direction to go, we know the space, we know we didn't put utilities underneath it. So expansion is required to be built into these designs. But honestly, even if in the next few years, population skyrockets, MSBA is not gonna do anything different than a 2,450 student project. All of those options are designed for 2,450.
But technically, if we were to go with the 5th 5-story option, and we were using, say the plans for, say we did the 5-story option, that could be reconstructed at some date if we have the need for it. Like, say, for instance, if we use this room as a classroom, like, we could work with it, right?
Absolutely. Once it's your building, it's your building.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can add an example for you, Ms. Milbury Ellis, because you were a Revere High School grad. You know the quote-unquote dead hallways over that was a design option so that if there was a possibility to expand on this building, those hallways would be ready to go, that you could expand out.
Oh, okay.
So.
Thank you.
Ms. Monterosso?
Yeah, I think you said like once the building is ours, so regardless of whether it's 4, 5, or 6, we can add to all of them. And I think what's important is that if we choose this, it's like the volume, right? Like we can have different containers, but they have the same volume. So even though it's 6, it's also just still built for the same. It's just more complicated for students and teachers to go up 6 flights of stairs. So we could just expand outward eventually. Yes.
Yes, and they all have the same, give or take, the same square footage.
So
yes.
part of the process that we go through before, at the very beginning of this, is we have to write our educational plan that both DESE and the MSBA have to approve. And the education plan includes things like how many biology labs do you need, how many chemistry labs, how many art rooms, how many music rooms, how many special education rooms, and that's all part of the analysis that MSBA does for our enrollment and what we should be projecting for a total enrollment, but also what populations of students we have in those different programs. So all of that goes into any of the designing that Dawn is doing. So any one of these 3 models that we're looking at right now would have those same number of different kinds of rooms. It's just how they're configured that would be different.
And it is a good point. I'm actually going to, I'm already got some ideas spinning. There probably are differences in these schemes on which would be easier to expand. And that's probably something that we'll look at when we come back. We can expand on that. So it's an interesting idea. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything further? I had just a few, I guess, statements. And it's more so, just looking at a couple of the plans, I mean, obviously, I understand you're working with the space that you have, and it's certainly limiting. And it's even taking away, if I'm looking at this correctly, it's taking away parking at Rumney Marsh, part of that front parking that's closest to the soccer field.
Yes.
So, it's going into a site that is tight, and it's trying to squeeze us in. And, I just hope everyone understands that we hear about this all the time. We build a school, and before the doors are open, it's already overburdened. And I understand there could be contingencies to expand upon it, but this is where it's unbelievably short-sighted to say that we had a large open space and a large open parcel to work on that's not utilized, and we've passed on that for, I can't even understand why, because it's not financial. And again, we're going to spend more money on this project. We're going to squeeze it in, and before we open the doors, we're going to be overburdened. And then on top of it, you're going to take away from students for 6 years now on a baseball field and a soccer field, potentially more. That's if everything goes to plan. Which we know in construction doesn't. You don't have an administrative building. That's more cost. I know that there's electrical boxes outside by that parking lot. You're going to have to relocate those. Those are all costs that I'm sure that you're not going to factor in. And you are going to come to us 2 years from now and say, oh yeah, that contingency money's gone. Can we get some more money? That's what will happen. So I hope everyone understands that out there. Big mistake. We are making such a short-term, short-sighted decision. And I appreciate you giving us the information, but this just makes me really furious. Thank you. Any further questions? We'll close this. Okay. Public comment? Yep. Anyone out there, Mrs. Kelly?
Thank you.
Nope. Seeing none? We have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. Adjourned.